I just finished replacing the front motor mounts in my E430, and what a difference. It's like the difference between night and day. Now when I start the engine up, I don't feel any vibration. It's so smooth, I can hardly even tell that the engine is running. So I decided I also wanted to check the transmission mount, because if that mount flattens out too and drops down, you can have, you know, some clunking sounds coming from underneath the transmission tunnel while you're inside the car. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how to inspect it. And usually you have to remove it to inspect it, but there is a quick check you can do. At the same time, we'll talk about inspecting the forward flex disc, because if you're going to change one and the other one looks bad, you probably should do the job together to save a little time. I've got the car up in the air on the lift, primarily for the purpose of showing you how this is done. You can do this on the ground, but you know, it's going to be a lot easier for me to film it and demonstrate it here. So now I want to just show you an overview of how the mount is placed in, and I'll show you how I do the quick check using a pry bar. Here's the location of the transmission mount. Note that it's located right below the flex disc, where the drive shaft bolts onto the rear of the transmission. It's connected to the transmission housing with these two bolts here, and then this lower plate, there's two bolts right here that hold that to the mounting plate. Now, the first thing you do is look in through the side here and see if that rubber's deteriorated. If it's really torn up in there and this bolt is sitting down lower than you see here in this picture, then it's likely that the rubber shot and the mount's collapsed. But I can use a pry bar here and just get in here and move it. What I'm listening for is any type of clunking, and I'm also making sure that the travel, it is going to move. It's designed to move like that, see that? But it shouldn't be going up and down a ½ inch. That usually means that the rubber's torn and it needs to be replaced. I'm looking up here at the flex disc. I'm looking for cracking in the rubber. And I'm looking for signs of rust around the bolt heads. If you see any rust around the bolt heads here, it means the bushings have loosened up. So this flex disc looks okay, and I'm not going to be replacing it at this time. The motor mount here actually looks okay too, but I'm going to remove it and take a real close look at it before I make my final decision. To successfully replace this mount, you must have a means to raise the transmission up. You're only talking about raising it up a ½ inch. If you're on the ground, you can do it with a floor jack. You see here I have a transmission jack because we're on the lift. But the key is in the piece of plywood that you use. I recommend a thick, quality piece of 3/4 inch or 1 inch plywood, and cut it large enough that it distributes the load over the entire bottom of the pan, and then move it up to that aft edge here. That's where you're going to get the most strength. So you carefully position the piece of plywood and then raise the jack. Once again, you try to get right on that back edge, and that really helps distribute the load. Okay, I'm just going to pump it there so it's holding the transmission. Now I will remove the two bolts right here. Now you don't have to remove this bracket. If you do this right, you can leave the bracket in place. This is going to save some time, but you remove these two bolts first. Okay, next step will be to just raise the transmission a little bit. See it coming up? And I'm only going to raise it about a ½ inch at the most, right there. And then I can remove the two larger bolts. These are number 16, by the way. Don't you just love it on these new Mercedes? They're using 16s instead of 17. So we'll remove these two next. Okay, look at that. That's pretty easy, isn't it? Now let's take a close look at this mount here. Well, I can tell you that this is not the original transmission mount to this car. This car has 170,000 miles on it, and I'm not even seeing any signs of cracking or deterioration of the rubber. And this looks like an OE mount, so I'm going to reinstall it. You know, I'm not going to put the new one in. I'll either return it or save it for a different car. So when you go to replace this, it's just in the reverse order. You'll have to raise that transmission up. Now, what I'm going to do is just put a light amount of Loctite on these bolts. Not a whole lot, but just a light amount. And I don't have that handy for the purpose of this video, but simply what you do is you put that back in, put these two bolts in, tighten them down, and then just lower the transmission, not all the way, just enough so you can get these two bolts started here, and then lower the transmission. Reinstallation is in the reverse order. And that's what I just love about instructions, written instructions. Yeah, right, the reverse order, but they didn't tell you you could run into a problem. And you can run into a real problem, very frustrating to put this mount back in if you don't know a few tricks here. Remember, this engine and transmission are mounted on rubber mounts up front, and when you jack this up, it can move forward and it can move to the side. So watch the sequence I use to get this mount back in and get all 4 bolts started without a big hassle. Okay, I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite on each bolt. The first bolt I'm going to start is one of the bottom bolts, the rearmost bottom bolt. See that? And I'm only going to turn it in about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. Now, once again, I've used Loctite here. I'm going to just lift the mount up and start whichever one of these big bolts will line up. You can see how far off they are. So I'm going to try for this one here. Okay. All right, success. So I've got this one started, I've got this one started. Now this one doesn't line up. So next I will lower the transmission very slowly. I don't want to put all the weight on that cross member yet, but I'm going to lower it down, and let's see if we can get this other one started. No, too far. Okay, let's take it right back there. I'm going to hold it right there. Let's get this one started. Okay, I've got that one started. Now I can take the 2 bigger bolts and just run them down till they're almost tight. You don't want to torque them, because it's going to move just a little bit, okay? All right, now for the last one right here. It's off. No, actually it's lined up. Sometimes you may have a little bit of a problem getting it started. If you do, I'm going to show you a little tip here. You can use a pry bar to move the engine side to side. You can see it moves quite a bit. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and lower the transmission all the way. All right, ease it down. Okay, there it is, it's free. Now I'm ready to tighten the bolts. And you'll want to kind of do these sequentially. What I do is I tighten the big ones first. You don't need a lot of torque on these. Remember, you're going into aluminum threads in that transmission housing. Okay, those are tight. Next, we'll run these 13s in, and we'll tighten these. Okay, there it is. Motor mount is done for the transmission.